we celebrate that a little bit? I mean, was that good? Like, man, I love getting to be in here with you. I told our team earlier we have a thing we call Rally. It's all the people that are serving on a Sunday, which I would love for you to get to serve on a Sunday and get to be a part of this thing. And we built Oaks where you can do something. So those of us who are serving this morning were gathered up. And I was just talking about how my prayer when I woke up this morning, I was still in bed. I was thinking about, what am I hoping for this morning? So I was talking about hope and singing about hope, and I was thinking about that. What am I hoping to see happen this morning? And when I was sitting in bed thinking about that, I wanted to get to see God do something. Like, I didn't want to just learn some things. I didn't want you to just learn some things or hear some things. I wanted you to get to experience the presence of God. I wanted God to do something in you, in us, right? That had significance, that impacted eternity. I recognize that when a lot of us come in to Oaks or any church on a Sunday or whatever, there's a wide spectrum of conditions of hearts. And so even for you, if you've been coming consistently, some weeks you come in and you're excited, and there's other weeks that you've come in and it took everything in you to get here. There's probably some people in some of those seats around you that had a really hard time even getting here. And there's some things going on. I don't know about you, but what happens in my life when there's some significant stuff going on with me, a lot of times I will have a tendency to bury that under a lot of other stuff. I can bury it under busyness, I can bury it under distraction, and I don't have to evaluate the seriousness of the situation that I'm walking in here with. I don't know about you, but I'm not always the best at evaluating the seriousness of situations. Some of you like that. I just kind of always assume everything's fine. That's my starting point. And if things are starting to go a little bit sideways, that's how I trend. My wife is one of those worst case scenario people. Just show of hands, you're a worst case scenario person. You're pretty sure the building's probably on fire somewhere and we just don't know about it yet. That's how you guys operate. That's not how I operate. I always just I'm oblivious to all sorts of stuff. And so it gets me in trouble sometimes. One time, back in college, we used to have this incredible rope swing in Tuscaloosa. It was this hidden gem of Tuscaloosa. A tornado killed it. It's fine, but it's gone now. Sorry, you don't get to experience that. But it was this rope swing. It was on this creek that came off of the spillway from Lake Tuscaloosa. And it was crazy. The thing was super high up in the air, and you would go off this thing. It'd sling you 30, 40 feet up in the air. And my wife Jessica's just cooler than us, and so she'd throw these swan dive backflips off of it. Coolest thing I've ever seen anybody do in my life. I would just flail around through the air and try not to belly flop, right? So we were there, and we were there one time with a bunch of our friends, and all these people were out there. We're going off this rope swing, and the crazy thing about this coming off the spillway is that the current would change quickly. The whole creek could reverse directions, and it'd be going one way when you got there, or turn around and go the other way when you came back. It was nuts. And so we got there. It was a calm day. Water was fine. We were going off of it. People were jumping. Not a big deal. Well, one of my friends was a girl, and she wasn't the most awesome swimmer in the world. And so I knew that. And so we're going, and she's doing fine, and I'm not worried about her. One time she goes, and it shoots you way off in the middle of this creek. Thing's wide, it's a deep hole. And she's kind of staying out there for a while, and she's swimming, and I'm like, what is she doing? And it's she peeing or something? Come on, let's get out of the way, She's not moving very fast. And then she starts kind of moving backwards a little bit, away from where she needs to be going. She's kind of floating downstream a little bit, and I'm like, she's fine, she'll be all right? And we're also all kind of laughing and having a good time. And then her head went under, and I was like, well, that's probably not right, but maybe she's all right. It'll be fine. She's going to get it. Their head went under again, and I was like, oh shoot, we got to do something, right? And so all of us start panicking, and I was a competitive swimmer so I'm going to go hero this thing, run down the hill, dive in, and swim over this girl and grab her and pull her, and she's like, why didn't you come? And I was like, I thought everything was fine, I thought everything was okay, and drag her back up there like a wet cat, and everything was all right, Sometimes I think we have a tendency to just hang on to this desire for everything to be okay. To a fault. That we'll let things progress and deteriorate around us or in us in all kind of different situations, right? We hang on to I'm fine far too long. We do it specifically, we do it the most, I think, in ourselves, particularly in how we relate to the Lord and the condition of our souls. I think that it's really, really easy for us to hide the condition of our souls and the brokenness that we walk in here with and the sin that's wrapping around us. I think it's easy for us to hide from those things and try to push those things out of our mind behind any number of good or great things. I'm fine. Everything's fine. When really you're not. And this morning, my prayer for myself and for you is that as we continue our study of the book of Luke, that you're going to get to come face to face with some of those things. I want you to get to have a moment here, just while we're here, where there's nothing that you can do. Like you can't accomplish anything. Like you can't get any work done right now. I just want you to have a moment to just evaluate the condition of your heart, the condition of your soul, like in an honest and transparent way. Just between you and the Lord. You're not going to have write something down and tell me about it, all right? You can if you want to. But I just want you to have a moment to get to evaluate the honest, truthful condition of your soul. It's not something we get to do a lot. I'm praying that God illuminates even some of those darker areas of your heart. Those places that we need him most, but it's most easy for us not to let him into. So we as a church, we've been walking through the book of Luke for a long time. We're only in chapter 7, so we're going to keep going for a long time past, all right? So we're picking up this morning at the end of chapter 7. And so we're going to start in verse 36 of Luke chapter 7. So if you've got a copy of God's Word, I'd love for you to join us there. And so we've been walking through this, seeing Jesus do some insane things. Seen him relating to John the Baptist and some doubt that John the Baptist was having. Got to see the mercy and the kindness of the Lord towards our doubt. We got to see the danger of just flat out rejecting him. And then Luke brings this story home, this whole trajectory that he's been weaving together, brings it down and beginning in verse 36. Calling us to examine the condition of our hearts. So verse 36 of Luke chapter 7 goes like this, says, after all this, one of the Pharisees asked him to come eat with him. And Jesus, he went into the Pharisee's house and he reclined at the table, all right? And so just a little context for you, if you're new around here and you do the Bible, Pharisees are the religiously, elite people, okay? They were the ones that, they seemed like they had it all together. They followed all the rules and they wanted everybody to know they followed all the rules. They were those super religious kind of people that rubbed it in everybody else's face. You probably met some of those kind of people before, right? They felt like they literally did nothing wrong, that they were righteous, they were blameless, they never did anything, God has to be happy with me because I'm a good person. Those kind of people. They thought that their strict rule keeping elevated them over other people. Some of you are rule followers in the room. Some of you have met some rule followers who thought that they had it all together, thought that they were better than you because they followed a bunch of rules. But Jesus, he showed up and just repeatedly pointed out to the Pharisees that they didn't really love the Lord, they just loved being right, which is different and probably sounds familiar to some of us. Didn't really love the Lord, you just love being right. Love people around you thinking that you're right. It's an interesting moment. I mean, these Pharisees, they do not approve of Jesus. They are not on the same page as Jesus, right? But they can't deny that he's making some waves. I mean, they can't deny some of the things that he's doing. So there's this curiosity, there's this interest, but it's not anywhere near love or devotion. Almost like an intellectual curiosity. I think some people still relate to Jesus like that. It's not a love or devotion thing, it's an intellectual curiosity, all right? And so they didn't want to honor him too much, but they do want to check him out. So they're trying to hit this balance between not overdoing it. So they invite him over for dinner, and the guests are arriving. They're all kind of packing in this house together. They're all coming around, and a common courtesy when guests are arriving would be to wash the feet of the guests. Have somebody there, or do it yourself. I have somebody washing the feet of the guests that are entering. They wore sandals. They're walking around in muck and stuff all the time. It's just kind of gross. So that was a common courtesy to take care of, right? And they would know that. And to fail to do that for somebody that you've invited into your home was a snub. That was an intentional... I'm not going to honor you. You're not worthy of that service, right? And so they invite Jesus over. Nobody washes his feet. You're going to find that out here in a minute. There was this intentional snub there. Jesus had to notice it. Jesus would be aware of that, right? Doesn't say anything about it. Going to overlook it. But it's also about to get fixed. It said that they came and there was this low table and they reclined around the table. This is the way they would eat. And so there'd be a kind of a low coffee table, if you can imagine maybe the coffee table in your living room. If you didn't have a dining room table, you didn't have that, if you just packed a bunch of people around your coffee table, how that would work out. And so the way they would like sit or kneel at these things is you'd kind of lean up against it, put your arm up on it, and you'd stick your feet out that way because you can't stick it under here. And so almost like everybody's feet would kind of be out like spokes on a wheel. You get a mental picture of that? I know this sounds weird, but it's going to matter a lot in just a minute, okay? So leaning on this table, they're leaned up on this thing. Jesus has his feet out behind him. The meal begins, and they're starting to have a conversation and spend some time together. But then somebody else comes in. Somebody completely different. Somebody that wasn't necessarily invited. And a hush fell over the room. Verse 37 says this, behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner. When she learned that he was reclining at the table at the Pharisee's house, she went and she brought an alabaster flask of ointment. She walks in, and this is what she does. Verse 38, standing behind him at his feet. Remember, his feet are out here behind him. Standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Remember, his feet weren't washed. Remember, and she wiped them with the hair of her head and kissed his feet and then anointed them with this ointment. No one in the room is talking anymore. Everyone is just staring. It says this is a woman of the city. That's probably the nicest way to put it. You feel me? Her sin was no secret. Everyone knew the things that she did. She would have felt like she did not belong among these religious elite. All right, that's not her people. All right, that's not who she hangs out with. Some of you feel like that. Some of you feel very much similar to her, that you feel like your sin is known to you. You know the stuff that you're into. People around you know the stuff that you're into. You're afraid the people in the room know the stuff that you're into. And there's this deep, probably fear in a lot of you. That the Lord knows what you've been into as well, right? That she's a woman of the city who was a sinner. There is no question about that. And I love that it says that she learned that he was there, that he was at this table, that she learned he was there. It said that she heard Jesus was there, and I just imagine her heart jumping a little bit. There's something about her, right? For her to come and do this, she's already learned some things about Jesus, all right? So you don't know what the backstory is. You don't know if she'd heard him teach. You don't know if she was at the funeral procession when Jesus raised that guy back to life. You don't know what she'd seen, what she'd heard. But she'd seen and heard enough to know that Jesus was significant enough to do something about the condition of her soul. Even if she didn't have all the answers lined out, she knew there was something different about him. There was something that hope could be found in him. Something that drew her to him. Something drew you here this morning. Even if you don't have all the explanation and why and all that stuff, you don't have all that stuff figured out. You just knew there seems to be maybe this place, maybe these people, maybe that God can do something about even me. That's where she was. She comes in the room, sees him, and just begins to weep. You know those moments where you just lock eyes with somebody, you see somebody, and just the tears start coming immediately? It just happens. Some of you are criers. I'm not normally a crier, but I don't know what's gotten into me lately. I don't know if I'm getting old or what, but I'm just randomly crying about stuff. Been watching this TV show called Bluey. If you ain't seen Bluey yet, Bluey gonna make you cry, man. Bluey gets me. They were playing chess the other day on Bluey, and I'm crying about it. I don't know what's going on. You should all watch Bluey. It's amazing. It's on Disney. All right, just a free plug there. Live stream people, right after this, switch over. It's gonna be great. My kids are watching. My kids are sick this morning. They're on live stream. It's hey, what's up? You're gonna be watching Bluey in a minute. It's gonna be great. So it just kind of gets you. I remember I was at Austin and Emily's wedding. And I've known Austin and Emily a long time. I got to do a lot of weddings. Same thing happened to Sarah's and Brett weddings, not too long ago. So I was at this wedding. I'm supposed to be up there. I got my little suit on. It's the one time of my life I wear a suit at a wedding. I break the thing out. It has dust on the shoulder from being in the closet so long. And I'm up there. I'm standing next to Austin, and we're okay. Everybody's having a good time. I've known them 10 years. Man, I've been so excited for them getting married. And then something happens when the bride walks in the room. Everybody looks at the boy, right? About the back half of the room always looks at the bride. The front half of the room turns around and looks at the boy because that boy's a mess, right? And you just want to see it. I look over at Austin. He's starting to blubber. She's crying. I'm crying now. And I'm the one that's got to talk. Like, I got to do a thing, right? I just got to breathe a minute. She walks in the room, sees Jesus, and there's no holding it back anymore. That ever happened to you? Ever come into a time of worship and it just feels like the Spirit's doing something in you, on you, and it's just hard to keep those tears back? She comes in, tears falling down her face. I don't think she probably planned this. She comes around where his feet are at, like comes around all these religious elite people, got the tassels on, like they're just decked out, man. They're all the righteous people. Comes right around his feet of Jesus, gets behind him, and she's just weeping over his feet, takes down a lock of her hair. Like it's tears falling down her face onto Jesus' feet and started wiping the mud off of Jesus' feet with her hair. Kisses his feet, gets this ointment, like, such expensive, right? She pulls this woman. She's just like bathing Jesus, like just honor, just worship. I imagine if you looked around the room that day, every jaw had dropped, right? These like religious, like, got it together people. Don't you just imagine as every eyebrow was up. Every jaw was dropped. What in the world is happening? Jesus doesn't stop her. Even reading that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, doesn't it you? Like there's just something about that. Like that is so something. I don't even know the right word for it, but like something about that makes you feel a little uncomfortable just to read it, to imagine that. But in light of what I know about my sin, in light I know about what Jesus has done for me, another part of me like really resonates with this. Like if you're a believer in the room, like you've trusted Jesus to be your Savior, like He's swept away all of your sin. He's given you this eternal hope, given you a new life, literally brought you from death back to life, bought you with the price of His blood on the cross. Like when I'm reminded of the depth of my brokenness and my need for a Savior, this makes a lot of sense. But there's something in us that still feels uncomfortable with it. Like, have you ever been uncomfortable with someone else's show of love or devotion or worship towards the Lord? Like maybe somebody around you has been just really overwhelmed. Like, maybe a time of worship like this, and you're feeling a little uncomfortable with them going full out. Maybe you've been seeing somebody in the front. They got their hands up. You're like, I don't like that. I don't know if I could ever do that. And you're feeling like there's something in me. There's an embarrassment. There's something holding me back from worshiping like that. I think everybody else in the room felt like that day. I remember one time I was at a conference, and a pastor was speaking, a guy named Francis Chan. It was at Passion. I think I was I don't know how old I was. And so I'm at Passion, and Francis comes up. It's his turn to speak. And I love Francis Chan. He's a good dude. And so he's coming up, and he gets up there, and he has a little podium thing and stands there and opens his Bible. And then like a few seconds pass. And it's kind of weird. You should start talking, Francis. Like, let's go, And then he kind of sniffles. And then Francis just starts crying, like weeping. Dude cried for like 90 seconds on stage in front of like 20,000 people. He's just standing there crying. I felt really uncomfortable. Part of me was like, I want to love Jesus like that. Right? Like I want there to be something going on in my soul that produces that kind of response to Him. Not forcing an emotion, not seeking out an emotion, but I want that to be real. I think sometimes you question the other people around you if it's real, right? Like, I want to really know Him. I want to be really impacted by Him. I want to be really thankful, really, actually, truly hopeful for this life. And like, I want to be changed by Him. I want to be filled with the joy that we just recited that passage about, right? Like, I want that to be real, not something I'm forcing. I want to know Him like that. Have you ever let the people around you stop you from worshiping? Is it an embarrassment thing or something? I don't know what it would be. Like, maybe you're not sure what they would think. They would just assume the worst about you. Maybe you want to raise your hands in praise or surrender and worship. You're not sure how that would go, and you're afraid everybody's going to be looking at you. I get it. Maybe you want to be, maybe you felt like, I really just want to kneel and pray right now, but I don't want the people around me to think I'm weird. Maybe outside of here, you felt drawn to like pray over a friend. You didn't know how they'd take it, so you stepped back. Or you wanted to speak Jesus' name in a conversation, but you were worried had that go over, so you held it in. You wanted to spend some time like reading your Bible and like around your roommates and having conversations about that and bringing that kind of stuff up, but you're not really sure how to do that, and you step back. This woman was way past that, y'all. She was way past whatever that stuff is in our hearts that prevents us from worshiping in a true and honest way. That ship had sailed a long time ago. Like her show of affection and surrender and devotion and love, it was raw. It was unencumbered. It was real. And I was coming through this passage. I'm reading through this passage this week, and I had to ask myself, like, does that describe my worship? Here and away from here, like my lifestyle of worship, does like this, her show of affection, surrender, devotion, like coming from a real and true place of thankfulness? Am I seeing that reflected in my own life? As we stand and sing, am I feeling like I'm truly worshiping for what he's done? Or am I encumbered in something? When I'm away from here and I'm engaging with other people, like, is it just now, like, overflow of my heart is just Jesus? The overflow of my heart is Jesus. Like, is that true of me right now? I'll be honest, I didn't like the answer. I got a lot of stuff going on in my head, a lot of stuff going on in my mind, my family. Like, we got stuff going on, and I'm like, I want to move towards her, towards this position, just honest and true, unencumbered is worship of my Savior. Simon, the guy that invited him, the Pharisee, he responded to what was happening. He responded to this true show of worship, responded with disgust. Verse 39 says, now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, thought to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who is touching him, for she's a sinner. This guy's assuming a lot about Jesus. That passage up there? Yeah. This guy's assuming a lot about Jesus. One, he's assuming that Jesus doesn't actually know the kind of person this woman is. Do you think Jesus knew? Yeah. He knew. Second, he's assuming that Jesus would naturally want to move away from somebody this broken, this sinful. Is Jesus moving away from this broken, sinful person? No. Third, the Pharisees, he's assuming that Jesus is a fake for not knowing better. I meet a lot of people that do the same thing. Jesus knows far more than just who this woman is. He knows the very thoughts that are rolling around in this guy's head, and he responds to what this guy's thinking. That's cool. Verse 40, Jesus speaks to the Pharisees' thoughts. Verse 40 says, Simon, I have something to say to you. And Simon's kind of startled. He answers. He says, okay, say it, teacher. It's the first time in the passage the guy's name is in there. So this guy's name is Simon. He just turns and directs his gaze at Simon. He's like, I'm going to say something at you now. This isn't like hey, I'd like to ask you a question. This isn't a polite risk. This is like, all right, I just heard what was in your head, and we're going to have a conversation about it. It's going to be a one-sided conversation. You're not going to like it that much. You ready? 41, Jesus says, all right, Simon, listen up. It says, there's a certain money lender. I'll tell you a parable here, bud. Certain money lender, he had two debtors. Two people owed him money. One owed him about 500 denarii. That's about 20 months' wages, almost 2 years. The other guy owed him 50, about 2 months. So when they could not pay the moneylender, he canceled the debt of both. Now, which one of those two people are going to love him more? Simon. All right, so like at minimum wage, all right, so 20-month salary, this is like $50,000. If you're making minimum wage, what possibility do you have of paying off a $50,000 debt? Like working Chick-fil-A, making ends meet on your own. You gonna pay off $50,000 debt anytime soon? Absolutely not. That is impossible. It's not going to happen. 2 months, yeah, you might be able to make that. It'd be hard, but you could do it, right? It's significant, but it's not entirely impossible, right? 50,000 to 5,000. That's kind of the comparison here. And so he asked him the question. Simon has to answer. It's pretty obvious. He says, the one, I suppose, for whom he cancels a larger debt. He's like, good job. You judge rightly. Can't really argue about it. And so now Jesus is about to show Simon the real difference between him and this woman. Jesus turns his eyes away from Simon, just locks eyes on the woman, but keeps talking to Simon, which is just cool. All right, verse 44 says, then turning towards the woman, he said to Simon, you feel like the power of that moment? He's like, I want you to recognize that my attention, my focus is on her. Not on you and your skepticism and your rejection. I want you to know my heart's towards her. Turns his eyes toward her. And he says to Simon, you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet. But she's wet my feet with her tears, and she's wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but the time I came in, she's not ceased to kiss my feet. You didn't anoint my head with oil, but she's anointed my feet with ointment. Like, Simon, you feel the difference, bud? Do you recognize the different relationships that we're seeing playing out here, where there's one that is distant and hard and cold, and there's one that is open and joyful and thankful because there's been something received. There's a faith here that you don't have, Simon, and it's showing fruit, man. Do you feel the difference between inviting Jesus to just drop by in your life and loving him with all your heart? That's kind of what's played out. Maybe some of you in the room, like your relationship with Jesus looks a lot like just asking him to drop by periodically. And you'll show up maybe to be a part of something for a minute or whatever, but it's not this woman. It's not loving him with all of your heart. There's an acquaintance. That's a different thing, right? The difference between Simon and the woman is maybe the difference between you and some of the people in the room with you. Like there's a difference there. Do you feel the difference between intellectualism and surrender? Where Simon is like, he's trying to engage intellectually. There's intellectual curiosity about this Jesus here. And this woman, she wants to know the truth as well, but it's not just about the intellectualism. It's about surrender. It's about following. It's about knowing him, being changed by him. Do you feel the difference there? Feel the difference between like knowing Jesus and knowing the rules. Jesus is not interested in me and you being people who are walking out these behaviors of moralism and doing a bunch of right things on our, like that's not the gospel. The gospel is that we're broken people like this woman who are in desperate need of rescue. And so Jesus left heaven to come to earth to provide that rescue for us. And then when he does, it changes us so intently that true fruit, like true hope, true love and joy get to pour out of us because of what we've seen done in us. Simon had not experienced that. If you haven't experienced that yet, you don't know him. You've just been asking him to drop by periodically. If you're not following him, if you haven't asked him to save you, like there is such goodness and such joy, such fulfillment in him that you can know. Then with the voice of all the love and grace of God himself, Jesus finishes the sentence in 47. He says, Simon, therefore, this is heartbreaking. He says, therefore, I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. She loved much, but he who's forgiven little loves little. Now, does Simon have less to be forgiven for than this woman? No. This guy's eat up with pride and superiority and elitism. Like he's eat up with sin too. Hers is more obvious. Everybody gets to name hers because hers are a little bit more external, but this guy's heart is rotten. Whichever group that you're in, if your stuff's more external, if your stuff's more internal, it doesn't really matter. Simon's not less sinful. Simon just hasn't realized it yet. The woman, she's overcome with worship at being in his presence. Simon, he loved little because he thought himself sinless, or at least thought his sin was minor. We love little when we see our sin as minor. How do you see your sin? Like in relationship to a holy God, like Somebody the other day literally told me, like, I really don't do anything wrong. I was dumbfounded. I'm like, well, you want to like coach me or something? Because, bro, I mean, I know me. I don't know what you're talking about. How do you see your sin? If you imagine yourself doing well on your own, you think your sin is minor, then Jesus plays a really minor role for you. Does that make sense? If you see yourself as, I've got it all together. I'm doing a good job. I'm better than those other people, right? If you see your sin as minor, then Jesus plays a very minor role for you. So how serious do you actually think of your sin? This is back to stuff we talked about at the beginning. Like we have this weird thing in us where we always gauge the condition of our heart as better than it actually is. We overlook it. We push it aside. We don't think about the real depth of our brokenness very often. Think about it like this. If you see your sin as a scratch, Jesus is a Band-Aid. Right? If he's like, in general, I've got it together, I'm solid, but I got a little scratch over here, I said a cuss word the other day in traffic because they deserved it. Then then Jesus is a Band-Aid. Band-Aids are not essential, are they? You can get by without a Band-Aid. It's kind of nice, it helps a little bit, but really you'll be just fine without it. Some of us can see Jesus that way. If you see your sin as like a broken arm, something that happened once and just needs to be fixed, then Jesus is like a cast. He's something that you can run to in a time of need, and you can kind of wrap it around for a minute there, and it'll help you heal, and then you're back on your own, and you're just fine again. You're made whole again. You don't need him anymore. You don't keep that cast on forever, do you? You just run to it when you need it. You've been relating to Jesus like that? Because listen, if you see your sin as death, that you were dead in your trespasses and sins, like you were as good as dead, like you were being tugged under for this life and for eternity, then Jesus isn't a Band-Aid, Jesus isn't a cast, Jesus is your resurrection. That changes the way you relate to him. If you've been brought from death to life, that changes the way that you relate to him. It's not a Band-Aid, it's not a cast, it's not a little thing that you run to when things are a little bit messy or whatever. It is your life. There's a dependency, there's a surrender, there's an actual worship there. There's a joy there because like he's changed you, he's rescued you, truly. Your devotion is proportional, your love's proportional. Like I have this common conversation with people where like I just feel like I don't feel him. What I think a lot of us mean when we say we don't feel him is that we don't feel much for him anymore. It's different. And I think the reason we don't feel much for him is that we've forgotten the core of the gospel. That we've forgotten the magnitude of what we've been rescued from. Christians, like, have you forgotten the magnitude of what you've been saved from? Of the magnitude of what he's done for you? Because when we remember, we act like this woman. When we forget, we act like Simon. But most of the time in those conversations, God's blamed for even that. Why doesn't he do something? Why doesn't he act? Why doesn't he give more feeling to me? We're not chasing feelings. We're chasing change. Your emotions are liars. Our devotion to the Lord is not dependent on your emotions. Like the woman in this story, she's emotional, but that was not the point. The point is the condition of her heart. The scale at which she saw her forgiveness. Like we don't choose and chase emotionalism. We chase Jesus. And yeah, it'll produce some emotions sometime, but it's not about the emotion. It's about knowing him, being changed by him, seeing real fruit in our lives. Two, the second thing, perhaps the best thing we can do when we feel those distance, like we just got to return to the core of the gospel. You got to be reminded of the core of the gospel. Like, I'm a sinner. I'm dead in my trespasses and sin. Like, we need to be reminded of passages like Ephesians chapter 2, where it says, in verse 1, it says, and you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that's now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived. Passions of our flesh, carrying the desires of the body and the mind. We're by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. That's your backstory. If you're a believer, that's your backstory. If you haven't trusted Jesus as your Savior yet, that's your current story. That's your condition, man. Like, that's where we all started. And if you haven't trusted Christ yet, that's where you still are. That's who I was. I couldn't overcome my sin. There was no way I was going to do enough good stuff to like make up for it. I was a child of wrath, like unworthy and broken and sinful and beat up. Like I needed rescue. I didn't need a dust off. I was as good as dead. That's the debt I owed. The passage continues in verse 4. It says, but God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. It is by grace you have been saved. He's raised us up with him and seated us with the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness towards us in Jesus Christ. For by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one can boast. That's your story. If you're a believer, that's your story. You needed to be rescued, and God in his infinite love and mercy and grace did a thing that had nothing to do with you, offered you a gift of his life on the cross. And if you would just say yes, he'd bring you from death to life. If you're not a believer yet, like that's what's open to you, that's your current situation, your current story, then salvation, rescue is found in the person of Jesus, not in you working harder, not in you trying to follow a bunch of rules, but in just trusting in this gift. By grace you have been saved through faith. It's not your own doing, it's the gift of God. It's just placing your faith in Jesus, saying, look, if you want to rescue me, I want to be rescued. Save me, forgive me, make me, bring me from death to life. He's done all the work for you. You just have to say yes to the gift. How big's your sin in your mind? Because that's how big Christ is going to be in your life. If there's distance, if there's coldness towards Christ, and like in any of you that are believers already, I'm pretty certain there's a mismatch between the scale of Jesus and the scale of your sin. And that's what I want you to have the opportunity to work on, think on, pray on this morning. How big is Christ in your life? You've been approaching Jesus like Simon or like the woman. If you're not a believer yet, and you've been approaching Jesus with this kind of an intellectual curiosity, but haven't accepted this gift yet, haven't put your faith in him, I want you to know what's available to you. I want you to know that Christianity, like faith in Jesus, is not about following a bunch of rules and morality and stuff. It's about being rescued by the God who loves you perfectly. You don't need to clean yourself up. You can't clean yourself up before you come to him. It's just falling into the love and grace of Jesus and saying, I need you to bring me from death to life. When I'm honest about the condition of my heart, the condition of my soul, it's a mess. Nobody else may know about that, but if you're the God of the universe, you do. I can't do anything about that stuff. I just need you to save me, and I'm putting my faith in you. I'm trusting that you can, that you'll make me whole, that you'll give me a new life. You'll give me a new identity in you. If you'll take this away from me, I'm willing to let you. Would you let him this morning? Some of you have never done it before. You've heard a lot about him your whole life. You've never just fallen back and said, I just need you to rescue me. I need you to save me. And I'll follow you as my Lord. Would you do that this morning, right there where you sit? What are you waiting on? You've been approaching Jesus like Simon or like the woman. Jesus looked at the woman at the end of the passage, not Simon. And he said this. He said to her, verse 48, your sins are forgiven. Some of you in the room who are believers, you need to be reminded of that and the weight of that. And that truth, this needs to draw you back towards worship. Some of you in the room have never heard that. You've never trusted that. You've never accepted that. I want you to know that you can hear those words in your heart this morning. Like your sin can be forgiven before you walk out of here. You'll say yes. You'll trust the gift. Verse 49 says, those who were at the table with him began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? And he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Christians, do you remember the moment where you knew that your sin was forgiven? Like the magnitude of your sin hit, and it hit hard, and then it was matched with this love and grace of Jesus. Do you remember those moments when you first realized that you were in fact rescued? Remember the thankfulness of that? I want to give you a moment to just reflect and think and pray on that, to remember what that was like, to see the scale of your sin in a fresh light so that you can shine an even brighter light on the person of Jesus in you. I just want you to get to remember. I want you to get to confess some sin. I want you to get to be brought back to a place where you're ready to worship in light of what he's done. So Christians, that's what I want to invite you to do. I just want to invite you to pray. I want to say a word to those of you in the room who aren't believers yet. That this can be your story, just like it's mine. Just like Austin told you earlier, I was a mess, and I encountered Jesus. I'm still a mess, but now I'm a forgiven mess that he's working on, and he's working in, and working through. I don't want you to walk out of here like Simon. I want you to walk out of here like this woman, knowing beyond any shadow of a doubt that your sins are forgiven, and that you can go in peace. So if you're sitting there, I just want you to have a time to think and reflect as well. Do you want this gift? What questions are on your mind? Like, what do you need to ask? What do you need to talk to somebody about it to get to a point where you're ready to know for certain, one way or another, know what you're going to do with this? I just want to give you some moments to think. Our band's going to come, and they're going to play for us a little bit, and they'll lead us to time of response in a minute, but I just want you to enter into a time just to reflect, to remember. If you're a believer, I want you to get to see the scale of your sin, to illuminate the scale of Christ in your life. If you're not a believer, I want you reflecting on what that means, what you're going to do with that. And I want to tell you this, at any point during our time, the rest of our service, some of our folks are going to be back there at Next Steps. This corner over here is our Next Steps corner. If you want to talk with somebody, if you want to pray with somebody, if you want to have a conversation with somebody about what that looks like in your life, if you just want to confess sin to somebody, you don't have to lay it, whatever you want to do, that's why those people are there. They're there to come alongside you, to help, to pray. They don't have it all together either. They're right there where you are. Whatever you're walking through, they've walked through it too. So at some point, if you're just praying there, sitting there thinking, you want to step out, you want to go find one of those people and talk with them, they'd love to pray with you. You come back to your seat. If you're not a believer in the room, you want to go back there and say, hey, I've got some big questions. We sit down and can I just voice these to you? I know we don't have time to answer every question in my heart right now, but can I just voice these questions and do that? If you're ready, you're like, hey man, today's the day. I don't want to walk out of here carrying my sin anymore. I want Jesus to save me. How do I do that? Let's go. Let's do this right now. They'd love to walk through that with you as well. That's why they're here. And a lot of us, and you just need to come back to the feet of Jesus. Tears streaming down faces. I'm a mess. I need you. I'm a mess. I need you. Will you pray? And then our band will lead us in a moment. Parents in the room, if you want to go grab your kids, it's a good time to do that because we got some other stuff we're going to do here in a moment, okay? So you pray as our band plays over you.